First of all, I was raised in a neighborhood not so far from Brussels, but actually a commune, let's call it on the countryside. So it was not urban at all. And in that neighborhood, everybody knew everybody. I'm speaking about the 50s. And one of the reasons was because the mothers stayed at home. So they knew each other. And so there was some kind of spirit of the neighborhood. We were Flemish speaking boys and girls and French speaking. And that was no problem. It was a bilingual conversation. We all spoke French. And so it was very traditional for that kind of period. I'm speaking now about the 50s. Of course, it changed dramatically later on. We will come back on this issue later on, because when I married and I had children, we also lived in a neighborhood of young parents, but nobody knew anybody. So it was the world changed dramatically. I went to school at the local school, the commune, with boys, only boys at that time, from all social categories. So we were raised not in a very special way, not in an elite atmosphere. So I raised in a very, very traditional way. But let's say for myself, I was ambitious from the start on. I loved politics when I was 8 years, 9 years, reading papers and so on and so on. And in my childhood, all of a sudden there was a break. We left Brussels and we went to Congo. So we lived 1 year in our former colony, Belgian Congo. And then I had to change and to adapt to this new environment. Because we came from, let's say, from the countryside, and now, all of a sudden, we were in a different culture, with different languages, with different people of another race. It was really some kind of I don't find another word than a break in my childhood. That changed also dramatically my view on the world. Because it became an open world. Unfortunately, we had to leave after 1 year in Belgium, Congo. And then I went to school again, of course, in my own country, but not in my commune anymore, but to Brussels. So this was a new environment, an urban environment. And I was raised in a college of the Jesuits. And there I received a very traditional, again, education of Greek and Latin, but with a very broad view, I would say, broad view philosophically, historically, and we were raised as, not say future leaders, but we could have ambition. And I was very ambitious. And I was very interested in politics. So for me, it was a perfect environment. Of course, in those years, you have all kinds of questions. You have all kinds of doubts. I lost my faith when I was 12 years old. So my teenage years were more years of skepticism, of doubts, of seeking the meaning of life. It was not so an easy period, although the environment was very traditional. I loved history. I didn't like mathematics, although I was not bad at all, but I didn't like it. But all what was related to thinking, to thoughts, to history, that were my favorite topics. But in my secondary school, we were raised in a very open spirit. We could raise any topics, discuss with them. I give you a very strong example. As a Slovenian, you could be interested. At the end of the secondary school, that's the year where we are focused on poetry. And the last year is focused more on rhetoric. But on poetry, but in that year, we also had to deliver a speech. And one of my teachers, who was a priest, said, "You will speak about Karl Marx. I know you never become a Marxist. I know you. But here are 5 books. You read them, and you made a speech on Marx." I did. I was, let's say, better informed and have better knowledge of Marx than the Marxist when I went to university. Just to describe you the open spirit in which we were raised. But my interests, as I said, were all what were related to thoughts. We followed, when we were 11 or 12 years old, the American elections. That was a famous campaign, John Kennedy against Richard Nixon. And John Kennedy won. Kennedy was a Catholic, but that was not the main argument. Kennedy was, in our view, an idealist. He launched later on the Peace Corps for helping poor countries, developing countries, and so on. He was always speaking about public interest, with his famous speech when he accepted the presidency. You have to do something for your country, for the common good. So this was for us the way we saw our future life. And we found confirmation in the Roman and Greek authors, which we were studying during the secondary school. So I was very happy intellectually in those days, because all what I wanted to know, I had the occasion to make acquaintance with it. Yeah, I'm a father of 4 kids, but they are not kids anymore, because they are between 35 and 29 years old. And they went to the same school as I did, but in a different environment, in a different civilization, because civilization changed. And not only a school for boys, but a school for boys and girls, mixed. Not at all with Jesuits and priests anymore, who were there full time, who were there not only as our teachers, but also as our educators, so to speak. So it was a different school, and the climate around the school was also different. I try not to have any nostalgia to former days. This isn't helpful, and you have to love your time. Even if it changed, you have to love your time. And we had our problems, but they also, of course, have their problems. What I miss, I will put it in another way. They are raised not only at home, they are not only raised at school. They, even in the 90s and in the first decade of this century, they were also raised via film, via already internet at that time. So there was a third educator in the game. Mm-hmm. So they were informed, but I think that they missed a little bit the framework to put all this information in a proper setting, so that it becomes understandable, that it also is contributing to give them, let's say, some reassurances, some roots. We had in our education formerly too many roots. I would say now they missed, in a very confusing world, they missed enough roots to be settled and to become solid personalities. We try to compensate this, my wife and myself, at home. but not everybody had that privilege. But for us, that's the big difference. The family and the school were the main places where we received information and where our character was constructed. But later on, 30 years later, there is a third party in the game. And I would say, when I see my grandchildren, they are very young, the oldest is 7 years, 6 years, and so on. They will be raised in even a more complicated environment, because you have not only television and the beginning of internet. No, they are raised with the social media, and they have access to all kinds of information, and all the more is necessary some kind of framework to put all those informations in a proper setting, so that it's helpful to form their personalities. So this every time has its own challenges. Let's first put it in this way, that teacher in the 60s is something else as teaching later on. And the change came around 68, 69. I will explain it. But let's say during my secondary school, we had Jesuits as teachers, but they were not only teachers. First of all, they taught not one kind of subject, but they taught Latin, Greek, Dutch, French, religion. So they were in front of the class during, let's say, 20 hours a week. I never counted it exactly. And they saw us, they worked with us, they corrected our exams, they played football with some of us, and so on and so on. So they knew us very well. Then not only intellectually, but also as far as our personality is concerned. They were in contact, not frequently, but there were contacts with the parents if there was something going wrong, and so on. So this was a teacher educator. It was not somebody who had a job, who was performing during his working time. He was performing in a lot of classes. No, each teacher had only one class. So this was very special. And there was, of course, a relationship between the pupil and the teacher. The teacher was the boss. This changed, and they told me later on, after the so-called May 68 revolution in France. And the relations of authority changed dramatically after this. But I was raised as the generations before me. I will not say since 500 years, but it was rather traditional, not to say very traditional. A teacher was for us as some kind as a father. I will not say that there were role models, so to speak, because our ambition was not to become a Jesuit or a priest. I never had the intention and no vocation at all. But we admire is too much, but it was between we admired them, we listened to them, and let's say we accepted them as somebody who it was exercising a profession. So it was much more than just a job. They were not our idols, but they had a big impact on us, a big impact. And later on, I realized how important they were in my lifetime, in those crucial years between your 12 and your 17 or 18. A few years ago, I was at the university, and in London, and some of the participants in the debate asked me, what can we do at the university? Let's say in the formation of personalities, of characters. I said, it's too late. You had to do the job between 12 and 18. When you were not successful as an educator at that time, you cannot correct it later on. These are the crucial years. And so for us, I think they all had a big impact. And it's not only for me, it is for my generation who had the privilege to have that kind of teachers and professors. Of course, there's not one element in it, but the basis of our, let's say, our education, and then I'm speaking more at school than at home. I come back to the family also, but at school it was, let's say, an open mind. You have to look at a problem or a person or a fact starting from many angles. So you have to see all the nuances. It's much more complicated than at first sight. Never believe immediately what was said. Have a critical eye on it. In the let's say in the logic of the philosophy of our Jesuit college, it was about making the distinction. In Latin it is distinguo, making the distinction and analyzing this precisely. Of course, you can do it in a superficial way. You can do it also very thoroughly, but the angle was always have a close look at it, and then make up your mind. The second important point was, don't think only about the self-interest. Don't think about only only your ego. You are at the service of a broader cause. Of course, religion in a religious way, it was, there is somebody who is your father, God. There is somebody who is your role model, Christ. But even when we studied, let's say, the big authors, from Caesar to Cicero or Demosthenes, it was always what is important for Rome, what is important for the democracy in Athens, transcending the ego and looking at the broader picture. And that was, of course, very crucial in our education. I will not say you are a part of the main, because the ego is important, but always related to others and to something that is transcending, as I said, transcending your own personal interest. And this, of course, was very fundamental in our education. A third element was respect. Respect for the text. Started with that. You had the text in Latin and you had the text in Greek. The text was as it was, and you have to look for the right translation, to respect the grammar, to respect the rules of the game. And so via, let's say, reading ancient authors, by the way, not religious authors. There were pagans, so to speak. It was very strange, because it was a Catholic school, but we have never read really Catholic authors. It was most of them were authors from, let's say, 2,000 years ago, before Christ even. But each time with respect to the text and looking for what was their inspiration, what was their motivation. It was in some way a little bit idealistic, I know this. So we were not raised in a very cynical way. And later on it helped me a lot because we live later on in a very cynical world. But our education was not cynical at all. In our family, and especially my father, he tried to give you self-confidence. Saying when it was good, it was good. Not saying nothing, but encouraging them. When he was not agreeing, then he was silent, and we knew it. We knew it when he was really not agreeing. And then, I would say, we tried to correct, again to please our father. And when something was hurting him, or could hurt him, we didn't say it. We didn't say it. There's not a very modern way. In a modern way, you have to be very straight, to put the things on the table, to discuss it, and so on and so on. That was not the way we were raised on. But I always remember that we were raised in a very positive way. So you make a choice, and if it was the right choice, and very often it was the right choice, we were encouraged to do so. And not try to guide you in a direction where he found that you had to go. We had to make up our own position, our own mind, and to define our own future. I started studying law, and after 2 years I discovered that it was not the right choice. I corrected it and I started studying economics and a little bit philosophy. He found law a good choice for me because I was interested in politics. But being himself a professor of economics, he was of course very happy that I made a different choice and went in that direction. But again, when he was not agreeing, we knew it also. We knew it without words. But my overall recollection of my family life was from my father, of course, from my mother also. It was more about creating a positive atmosphere and encouraging us to develop our qualities and looking for opportunities. Yeah, but I would say there are not specific lessons. When you had to face later on big challenges, as you call it, I'm referring now to the latest stage of my career, when you had to face the crisis in the Eurozone. I cannot fall back on something that my father told me. But when in your professional life and your personal life you face a difficult situation, then of course a balanced personality, of the balance you build up during the years, is from utmost importance. So that you are not panicking immediately, that you become desperate, that you don't see the meaning of things. There are moments where you are, let's say, lost. But because you have that kind of education that where your personality was developed in a very balanced way, you can fall back on something more stable, more rooted. And of course this was from utmost importance. That you keep a clear view, you always keep a positive spirit, looking for solutions, not looking only for adding a problem to another problem. So this broad view in which you see things, that is the basis of your future life. Of course, there are moments in which you are more desperate and more lost than in others. But there is a basic floor. You were raised in a way that you got a chance to become a balanced personality. And I still remember I had an exam in the last year of secondary school, and there was a priest taking the exams, but he was not a teacher of us, so he didn't knew us actually. But for one type of exam, he was the man in charge. And he said, he asked me, if you had to define your education of what the Greek and Roman world in one word, that was the question on the exam. It was not in our papers. And I thought, and spontaneously, I said, balance, equilibrium. That was the main message from all what we have read and learned during those 6 years in the Greek and Roman world of 2000 and 2500 years ago. So, and actually, a balanced personality is the greatest gift you can give to a boy of 18 years, starting his life. I'm not a teacher, I'm not a professor, so, and I'm happy that I haven't to do this. But I would, if they ask me to give one advice, and I think a lot of teachers are practicing it, let's say formally, with having this in mind, or not being fully aware of the pedagogic objective. But I mean this: the biggest thing you can give to kids is to leave in some way, or to show them that they have to give instead of to take. To give in the sense of give to others, trying to develop their empathy for problems of other, not only the other kids or boys or girls of their class, but also reaching out, and a lot of schools are doing so, to other nationalities, other races, to let them know not only their own way of thinking, but showing them that there are other ideologies, other religions, where you can find positive messages. So to give them overall and the feeling that the sense of life, the meaning of life, is when you are open to others, to the other. It hasn't to be God, but opening that perspective, opening to the world in general, and this generosity, this openness, I think that is the greatest gift you can give, so to speak, to young children. And I think a lot of teachers are already practicing it. I visit regularly schools, and I see they do their utmost to give that kind of message. And this is in line with what many others from former generations did. Of course, in a very different world. The only challenge of one of the challenges is, if you open minds, if you liberate them from selfishness, you let them develop some kind of positive outlook on the future and on the world, you have to take in mind that openness is very good, but also you have to be rooted somewhere. You have to start from somewhere. And that is not always easy, because a lot of children had to face problems inside their families. And they have to experience also, let's say, the same love at home. If they haven't this kind of love capital at home, it's very difficult later on to develop all those positive feelings and having those positive qualities when you haven't seen them at home. So roots, so to speak, emotional roots, are from utmost importance. In our world, it was evident. Now it is less evident. Now it is less evident. I think that you discover your examples of your role models later on. Then you remember, and I said, I tried to do as this one did and this one did. And so when you are 12 to 18 years old or even younger, you're not so much aware of it. Because I'm a very specific case. Because being interested in politics, of course your role models are, as I said, John Kennedy and others. But that is a very specific case, so I will not generalize this. But later on you realize who had really an impact on you. And again, I'm not very original when I say that your parents, in my life also, my grandmother who lived with us, your teachers and so on, they played a big role. They played a big role. Even if intellectually we are looking for even other role models, and I mentioned the names and my very specific angles. It strikes me, let's say, regularly, that when people speak about their life, and in some radio programs, there's 1 hour and they're speaking about their childhood and so on and so on. And even those who are let's say, defending themselves, I'm not a believer anymore, and I was raised in a Catholic college, but I give it up, I lost my faith, and they try to show that they became different persons. But they spoke all the time on their parents and on their schools. They tried to give another impression, but they just couldn't avoid speaking about this, and most of the time, even after some while, even much more positive than they started the interview. So afterwards, you realize that let's say simple people have a much bigger influence than great people. And then thinking at it, we have to be very careful to make idols our examples, because it will end in a very big frustration. They have always more success than you, they are more handsome than you, they are much more smarter than you, and so you are looking for something that you cannot obtain. You organize some kind of artificial world with artificial objectives, and it all ends in failure. And that's, let's say, one of the reasons, and now speaking more generally, that people became unhappy, because they are always comparing to others. You haven't to compare. You have to be your own man or your own woman with his own gifts, with his own objectives in life, which is being proud of the world where he came from, the family where he came from. So we have to be satisfied, so to speak, with what we have. Of course, we may have the ambition to go further, to become something in the world, to develop our qualities, but abandoning this, let's say, impossible goals and comparing us all the time with those who have more success and are more richer than we, are mightier than we. This is a catastrophe. Comparison is a catastrophe. It leads to the, let's say, a lack of self-confidence. It leads to jealousy. It leads to a state of frustration. It leads also to a dramatic searching for something that you will never obtain to the level of your idol, of your role model. So being much more satisfied with your own fate and trying to develop as good as you can. I think this is the basis for happiness. Unhappiness is when you're always in a comparing mood, because you will lose, and you will end, as we call it in the language of today, you will end as a loser. You're not a loser. You haven't to be a loser. You can be a winner, but not in the eyes of the outside world. You can be a winner in your own eyes. Yeah. I will answer. I'm not sure that it is really the first time.
The second one.
We had some pocket money, and we lived with my parents, and also the mother of my mother, my grandmother. And it was her birthday, and I had a very small amount of pocket money. And I went to the town. It's not so far away from town to Brussels, and we lived actually 6 kilometers, but it was the countryside, as I explained to you. And I entered the warehouse, and it was a very difficult choice. We had a small amount of money, but I wanted to buy something that pleased her. I think I spent 1 hour in this store to find something. I forgot what it was, but she was happy. But it was a very difficult choice. And later on I realized it was really an economic problem. You have the scarcity of the means, and you have plenty of choices, of possibilities, and you have to make one choice. I did, and she was happy. No, I can only encourage you. Encourage you, because what we need is kind of counter-attack to rising individualism and let's say a very superficial world. We have to develop all the positive virtues and qualities that are in each of us, and I think this is the main objective of education in schools and in families and even elsewhere. So I can only encourage you, but because I feel that we share this same goal. I don't consider myself as a role model at all, so I can only tell my own story. And you pick some bits and pieces up from it. But when I'm speaking and I make a lot of speeches, of when I'm teaching and I'm teaching more and more, I always have in mind this very, let's say, this very small ambition. You never know that in your audience, among your students, there is a boy or a girl that said later on, I heard this from Van Rompuy, and I never forgot this. And then it is worthwhile to do those things. Because I myself, I can remember, not now, but I can remember when I hear something, yeah, he told me so. And that at that time, I found it also worthwhile. That's why I remembered it even 50 years later. So when you are speaking and teaching, you have always to keep this in mind. Your words can touch upon somebody that can change his life or contribute to a change in his life. And then it's worthwhile.